And next thing we're going to do is deal with when you click on an enemy unit, we want you to attack him. So let's make a new trigger on the left here. Let's call this unit clicked. The event is going to be unit selection, unit is clicked, and any unit is clicked by any player. So this is where it was important in the data editor that we unchecked those flags of unit cannot be clicked, unit cannot be highlighted. Because if we didn't, then this would not respond to that. This event would never occur for any unit, which is actually default by Blizzard because they don't need to use it in triggers. So it was key that we did that data editor part, and you'll have to do it for any subsequent unit you make. Make sure those things are unchecked in their flags. So when any unit is clicked by any player, we're going to check some conditions here. So add a new condition, comparison, click on the left bracket. I think we want to do player alliance aspect. Get relationship between players. Yeah, I think we want to do this. So get relationship between players. If player not one, but we want to do function unit owner of unit. If the owner of the triggering unit treats player, instead of two, we want to do function triggering player. So the triggering player is the one who clicked the enemy unit, like aka me, and the owner of the triggering unit is like hostile or whatever. And we want to make sure they treat each other as enemy equals true. And then the other thing we want to do, so copy paste that, click on the leftmost bracket here. And the other thing we want to do is check that the player controller of the, instead of player one, triggering player is equals to preset user. So we want to make sure that a user is the one that is clicking just to be safe. To make sure it's a player. And then the actions we're going to do here, variable, set variable. Instead of that, we're going to set player move and attack info to be, instead of 0, function triggering player. And the member is going to be unit clicked to equal value function triggering unit. Where's triggering unit? Did I miss it? Oh, sorry. I accidentally did this first, so actually make this true. The next one is going to be triggering unit. Sorry about that. My brain just exploded. Change this one to be target. Target direction is actually a mistake, so let me just go back here. So change it to be target direction, but sorry I missed this. Back in move and attack info record, hit F2 on target direction and rename it to target unit. I'm sorry I messed that up, but that should be target unit. And that's no wonder I was confused. Anyways, change this. Now you can see, well, let me just click off. Now you can see it says target unit there. And instead of true, we want to be function triggering unit. And that makes sense. So, like I said, go back in here, change it to be target unit. Target direction makes absolutely no sense. And unit clicked, we want to just set that a unit has been clicked as true, and that the target unit that was clicked is this triggering unit, so that later our attack, or actually no, our where is it, follow most loop and this stuff all depend on like unit clicked and stuff. So we need to do that. And basically now what we have to do is order him to attack. So next action in this unit click trigger is unit issue order, and we're going to order variable heroes. Instead of 0, choose function triggering player, and click on the left bracket of ability command and change it to be order targeting unit. Change ability command now to be attack. Click on that one, and you can actually leave that at triggering unit. And so now he'll attack that target unit, and we stored him in a variable just because we might need him at a certain point. So it's good to have him know what the player has selected as their target unit. And then we order him to attack, and then we say you moused up later, then your unit clicked would be set to false. You'd be ordered to stop, and this loop would subsequently do whatever. It basically all ties in nicely. And we're actually done with the with this folder, and we can move on to your spells now, which is cool stuff. So let's make a new trigger on the spells folder here, and let's call this change to spell 1, and let's make the event UI key pressed. Any player presses the 1 key down, and let's make that actually up, so when you release the key, and the rest is fine. And just check that the condition that the controller is a user, so I'm going to copy that from unit clicked and paste it back into this condition of change to spell 1. So controller player triggering player is a user. And then because I don't want to recreate the wheel here, if we go back to our initialization trigger and shift click these 4 actions and then paste them into here, and then we're going to use this exact same thing, so just change picked player in each one to be triggering player, which again is gray, but it works. So now the triggering player is going to have his Psystorm set up in case he had switched to a different spell and then switched back to Psystorm. And that's all set. And then we also actually go back to initialization and copy the UI action, the text message, and paste that in here as well. And change picked player to triggering player. Make sure you do that. I forgot to do that actually, and I had bugs. So silly me, but don't do that yourself. This is all good to go. So let's copy paste this trigger, rename it to change to spell 2, and change the event to be the 2 key. And now we want to change the spell. Instead of Psionic Storm, we want it to be Ghost Sniper. And right mouse spell requires target, now needs to be set to true. Right mouse spell requires ground, needs to be set to false. Not a big deal though, because this one overrides this one. You'll see later. And the cooldown, I'm going to set it to be 0.6 because I don't want you to be able to hold down and snipe too fast. And you could change it in the data editor for the cooldown as well if you wanted. And then display message, let's set it to be, what is it? Snipe set to right mouse. And I'm going to save so I don't have my crash problem again. And copy paste this trigger and call it change to spell 3. And player presses the 3 key. Controller player's user. And now the ability, instead of Ghost Sniper Round, it's going to be Sentry Guardian Shield. Choose that one. Right mouse spell requires target is not true. And it doesn't even require ground either, so we'll leave those both as false. And the cooldown is going to be, I'm going to say 1 for this one. I think I did 0.5 in my demo, but 1 is a bit fairer, I think. And now we just say Guardian Shield set to right mouse. And that takes care of actually changing between your spells. And now we're going to actually make it so, so you can cast those spells. So I'm going to be making an action definition here, which is basically a trigger with only actions that you can pass stuff through to it from triggers. So several triggers could run an action definition and pass in a different player. And I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to teach you programming concepts here that deeply. I'm just saying that's what we're going to do because that's the best way to make this work. So on the left here, after our last trigger there, add a new action definition. And let's call this cast spell loop for player. And the parameter here, which is what's passed through from another trigger running this is basically going to be run as an action from another trigger, from our right mouse button triggers, which I'll make later, which we want to pass through which player we want to cast the spell for, who hit down the right mouse. Well, let's make a parameter here. Let's call this just player, and integer is fine since players are just integers, by the way. And that's all we need to do for that parameter. And now under actions, let's do a new action, then general, find this one, and do while. So this will run forever while these conditions are true. And what conditions? Well, let's add some. Let's add a comparison condition. And let's click on the left bracket, and let's find variable player spell info. Change 0 to be parameter player. Change member to be right pressed, and equals value to be true. So while this player has their right mouse down, and copy paste, actually, let's copy from a different trigger, follow mouse loop, copy heroes picked player is alive equals to true, and paste it in here. So while heroes, and change picked player to be parameter player, while that hero is alive as well, because you don't want this to run while the hero is not alive. I found that through playtesting. So while both of these are true, we want to do some actions. So add a new action, general, if then else. We want to check if we have a target spell or a ground spell or a no target spell. So the first condition is a comparison, and change it to be variable player spell info, change 0 to be parameter player, change member to be rightmost spell requires target, and equals equals to true. So if our rightmost spell does require a target, let's say you hit, I think, spell number 2, which does, then we're going to order our guy to cast his spell. So then we're going to do a unit issue order, and we're going to order not triggering unit, but variables, heroes, and not 0. We want to do parameter player. And we want to order him to click on the left bracket of ability command, order targeting unit, I believe, because this requires a target, yeah. And then change ability command to be variable, player spell info, change 0 to be parameter player, change member to be rightmost spell. So this is the great thing about having that record with our spell. We don't even have to know what it is, we just know that it's set to something. In this case it'll be snipe, I think. Targeting, instead of triggering unit, we want to do variable, player spell info. Instead of 0, we want parameter player, and instead of member, we want highlighted unit. So that was that highlighted unit's going to be set in a second when we do some more triggers. When you highlight over a unit, and then if you start holding down right mouse, this will run, and it'll know what highlighted unit that was. So a little bit of foreshadowing there. Otherwise, we want to display a message. UI new action UI text message in the else here. Change the message to be need target with an exclamation mark. Hit OK. Change all players to be convert player to player group. Change the 1 to be parameter player. And subtitle change to be error. So it'll give you an error that you need a target. And I know that in Diablo you would actually hold down and arrows you wouldn't need a target. You would just hold down and your Amazon's arrows would just shoot, and if they hit a target along the way, that's how it worked. But you can do that in this too, but there's no spells in here by default that do that, so I would have to do a whole spell tutorial, and that might be a separate thing. So I'm just going to say you would require a target for snipe. It doesn't hit a unit along the way traveling like a bullet, like an arrow did or any spell really in Diablo sort of traveled along the way, and if it hit a unit, it hit a unit. If it didn't, it didn't. But in this case, we're saying you require a unit, and we're going to play a sound also. So add another action, play sound. Change sound link to be, I think if you search for error, scroll down and find UI generic error, and instead of all players, make it convert player to player group, function, parameter, sorry, player. And I'm going to do at 75% volume because it's pretty loud. Well, this is good and all, but we don't know if the player actually had a highlighted unit. So we want to fix up this part to add another if then else in here. And what we want to do in here is copy paste this condition so it'll save us time, and change it from rightmost spell requires target to be unit highlighted and equals equals true, and then drag this in here, and then drag these two under there. So now it'll say, we're going to repeat this forever while your right mouse is down and your hero's alive. We're going to check if your current spell for right mouse requires a target. If it does, then we're going to check that you have a unit highlighted, and if you do, then we're going to order you to actually use that spell on that unit. But if you didn't have it highlighted, if you didn't have a unit highlighted, we'll say need a target. And then if you didn't have a spell that required a target, we're going to have to go over here and do another if then else and copy paste this condition into here to save us time. And then we're going to say, well, if your rightmost spell requires ground equals equals to true, just check that. So if it requires ground, like say a Sandstorm spell, then we're going to copy paste this unit issue order into here. We're going to order heroes player to, and then click on the left bracket here and change it to be order targeting point. Change ability command to be variable, player spell info, change 0 to be parameter player. I'm going fast, by the way. Change member to be rightmost spell, and change target point to be variable, player spell info, 0 parameter player, member rightmost position. So that's why we stored that rightmost position, so that this thing will be able to figure out where to cast SCII, which is great. It's all taken care of. But otherwise, if you didn't have a required target and then you didn't require ground, we'll copy paste this and then we'll say, click on the left bracket here, we're going to order with no target and change the ability command to be variable, player spell info, change the 0 to be parameter, and change the member to be rightmost spell. So this is a pretty big jumble here, but I think it should be fairly obvious like what it's doing. It's basically repeating forever while they have this pressed and while the hero's alive both of these have to be true, otherwise this will cancel out. It's going to check which spell they currently have on, and based on that it'll cast to a unit, cast to ground, or cast to nobody, just a guardian shield yourself. And this is taken care of, but now, like I said, we need to have our unit highlighted event to actually set the highlighted unit and stuff like that. So let's add a new trigger below this on the left here, and let's call this mouse down right. And why don't we copy some stuff from mouse down left? So copy this event and put it in here, and let's change it to be right instead of left. And then let's see what else we can get out of here. We want to copy mouse clicked and copy paste that into the local variables of here. So we have the mouse clicked position, and then the other thing we want to copy is the condition as well, and then paste that into these conditions. And change it from player spell info to be player move and attack info, and change it from right press to be left pressed, and leave it as false. So we want to make sure left mouse isn't pressed while we're doing the right mouse one here. And the actions we're going to do, new action here, variable, set variable. We want to set player spell info parameter function triggering player, which is gray again, and the member is right pressed. We want to set it to equal true, and copy paste that, and then we want to change right press to be right mouse position to equal mouse clicked. So that's why we had that local variable up here, so that we could get the mouse clicked position. And then the last thing we want to do is, because he just held his right mouse down, we want to order him to run the cast spell loop. Because now if he's holding down his right mouse, we want him to be able to cast his spell infinitely as he has mana. So add a new action, click on the top general here, and find our little action definition, cast spell loop for player. And change the 0 to be function triggering player. So this will say, I want to cast the spell loop for player, triggering player. This action definition will run. It'll say, oh, player was triggering player 1 or 2 for our map, and then it's going to run that on this player. And if player 2 pressed down his mouse, it's going to run a separate instance of this action definition for that player. And that's why we made an action definition, so we could pass through which triggering player we want to run for that instance, if that makes sense. And now we want to do the mouse up. So new trigger on the left here, mouse up right. So when you lift up off your mouse button, we can copy this event from mouse down and change it from down to up. And local variables, we just want the trigger, let's just call this player, and it's going to be integer, and click on the 0, which is the initial value, and change it to function triggering player, which is grayed out again. We need to store this because we're going to have a wait action in here, and if you have a wait action, you can't reference the triggering player. You can't reference anything related to the event after a certain amount of time because it gets freed from memory, I think. So we have to store it in a local variable physically, manually ourselves. And you'll find that yourself if you didn't do it. So if you tried to reference triggering player after waiting. So first action in here, variable, set variable. We want to set player spell info instead of 0, triggering player. Member, change it to right pressed, and we're going to set the value to false. And so now we know that right mouse is up, and then we're going to wait a very small amount, wait 0.35 real-time seconds, and then we're going to do an action unit. Actually, we're going to copy an action. So from mouse up left, let's copy order hero to stop and paste that in here. And the reason we put a wait is because if he is some spells, when you click them, your guy has to turn, and it basically makes it so he doesn't do anything, because by the time he finishes, like if you just right clicked once and he wasn't facing the right direction, he'll turn, but this stop order will come so fast that he'll just not do anything. And it's a little bit of a user experience hazard there. So by putting this little wait, if you just tap right mouse, he'll have time to turn and actually cast it. And in Diablo, you can tap or hold, right? So I'm trying to simulate that as best as I can. And that's all we need for this. And the last two triggers before we test are the highlight. So new trigger, let's call this highlight enemy. And unit clicked, I probably should have called this enemy unit clicked, but whatever. So back in highlight enemy here, the event is when a unit selection unit is highlighted. Any unit is highlighted by any player. And this depends on our data editor thing we did for flags, like I said. Conditions here, let's see. We can copy this from unit clicked. We can copy both of these conditions and paste them in here. So we want to make sure it's an enemy that was highlighted, and we also want to make sure that the controller of the highlighting player is the user, which I don't think a computer could ever highlight, but I'm just being extra cautious. The actions we want to do, variable, set variable, change variable to be player spell info, change 0 to be function triggering player, and change the member to be unit highlighted, and we're going to set that to true. And then copy paste that and change unit highlighted to be highlighted unit. It's funny that those are just like swapped. Anyways, and it's going to be a function triggering unit. So we know which unit has just been highlighted, so that when you're mousing down to cast Psystorm or Snipe, there's a target associated with that. And that's good for that. And let's copy paste this trigger and call it unhighlight enemy. It's probably not grammatically correct, but not a huge deal. Unhighlight enemy. And the event is when a unit is unhighlighted. And this event, I think both these conditions are actually good still, but we want to set, we want to do one more thing. One condition before these two, make sure it's before. That happens, a bug that happens when, I think you were like, when you cast two spells after each other. It's some weird bug that basically causes player 16 to give a player 16 error, So add a new comparison condition, change it to be, actually leave it as owner of triggering unit, but change it to be less than or equal to 15. Because this will get run by player 16 and it causes an error, and player 16 is no player. But yeah, like I said, it causes an error, so I had to add this condition. And I forget why right now, but it was quite a bugger. So, and then we'll leave these two, and then we want to set unit highlighted to be false, and then set triggering unit to be preset no unit. And thanks for bearing with me. We are actually done with triggers, data, and the terrain, and your terrain will be a little bit different than mine, granted, because mine crashed and I had to call up my actual map. But why don't we go in game now and just make sure it all looks good. As you can see, the player 2's guy disappeared. Your map might look a little bit different just because I'm using my terrain from my original map. It gave us this little message. So if you hold down left mouse, you can see your guy moves around. If you tap right mouse, oops, execution took two. Well, we'll have to see what that problem is, but I think my computer's lagging a bit right now, but execution took too long in mouse down right. So if I switch to 2 now, or switch to 3, I can put on Guardian Shield. Switch to 2, and I can snipe them. And my thing is lagging up pretty bad right now, so I probably forgot something, or oh yeah, you know what? I did forget something. So why don't we go back in the trigger editor and just fix that, and then we'll come back to testing this. So the thing I forgot was in cast spell loop for player, this while condition is running way too frequently. Like just in our follow mouse loop, I had this little wait, so let's copy this. And cast spell loop, put it at the bottom. Make sure it's at the bottom here of the while actions. Make sure it's not inside any of these if then else's. And basically, let me just check this here in my notes. I think basically what we want to do here is we want to wait for that cooldown time, right? So instead of 0.08, we want to do variable player spell info, parameter, change 0 to be parameter, and change the member to be rightmost spell cooldown, real-time seconds. So that's where it came into handy when we set the cooldown here to be 1, to be 0.6, to be 0.5. This was getting run way too many times. So I'm going to save, and I'll see you back in the test here. Alright, so now if I right mouse down, there should be no error, yeah. So you can right mouse click, or you can hold down. Oops, I clicked on the cliff there. You can hold down and you'll see he casts sort of like Diablo, which is great because as we all remember in Diablo, you can sort of hold down your spells, and I really wanted to get that full simulation, not kind of half-ass it to doing that. And then if you can hold down 3 as well to do Guardian Shield, and then 2, you can hold it down, but it's instant killing these Zerglings, so it's not a big deal. And as you saw there, needed target. And now let's just make sure left mouse works. So let's go up to some oops, there's a Zergling. I'm going to hold down left mouse on him. and the highlighting thing's working. So basically, as it highlights, our trigger runs right now, setting our highlighted unit. And then when I click 2 to make sure I'm on right mouse for snipe, it actually uses that, when I right click, it actually uses that highlighted unit to as the target there for that spell, because we technically don't even have our guy selected right now in terms of an RTS point of view. In terms of StarCraft 2 point of view, we don't even have our guy selected, so everything has to be done through triggers. But how do you know when I have my mouse on a guy? Well, that's where our unit clicked and unit highlighted triggers come into play. So I set it to 1, and I'm just going to sidestorm the hell out of them. And that's pretty much this tutorial. I mean, I hope I can see some more Diablo maps out there. I'm trying to give you like a really good base here for controls. I was actually going to use this in one of my maps, but I don't know if I'll ever finish that. So might as well make a tutorial, right? So thanks for watching, and I know it's a long tutorial, but this is pretty advanced stuff. It's like, I mean, it's pretty much exactly Diablo controls as best as I could remake it on the fly here. So, yep, thanks for watching.